Dear heads on the wall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Hey! Dear heads on the wall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Dear hunter shot Bambi, Bambi took the fall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Yeah. You're not paranoid if they're out to get you. You're not paranoid if they're out to get you.
Today is, I believe it's the 17th of April. It is Saturday. We are in the Tribog area, and we are out today doing an assorted bit of field research. The weather's been weird because it's again today back down in the April norm around 57 degrees. It's nice out, but during the week we had a taste of July, and it was actually at one point 90 degrees, which is a little too quick to phase in summer. We like the time in between where it's more like this in like 57 to 65 kind of range, where it's nice. It's not cold, it's not hot. You can wear short sleeves or long sleeves. You don't have to worry about it as much. But anyway, we are going to go around. We have one agenda today to put out some more research equipment in the field and try to get some longer term observations here. I have getting back up to Vermont in my mind as well, so there's that, and probably a little bit of banter along the way to discuss things as well. But let's get moving and see what we find, and we'll see what we find when we find it. So come on along. And phase one of the day is done. We are on the far end of the stream and kind of walking bumble effing through stuff and kicking up things and hitting ourselves with them. We are I guess gonna head up this way and pattern sweep through and look for signs of life and see where we are. We will see how we make doing a makeshift deployment of nighttime observation equipment, mainly just because it was kind of a last minute decision to deploy, and we had an odd assortment of possibly previously used batteries, and it's not projected to be crazy cold this week, so drain on the battery shouldn't be too extreme. But we kind of did, like I said, we kind of did this half-baked, and that's my bad habit in doing field work sometimes, is you don't, because unfortunately doing higher end IT, you get pulled into work related things that stay on your mind after hours, mainly because of the complexity level of it, and that leads to your mind being preoccupied with work stuff more so than hobby stuff, and that's just kind of how that goes. So it won't be the first time that I have Is it me or is there just more shit in my way walking through this stuff today? Won't be the first time I've made a half. Either that or you normally go further up there. So we're kind of walking through more like little scraggly shit in the way. Let's like change this trend because it's getting tiresome. And I don't really want to have that drag out. I'm probably going to extend the deployment for about a week because in the next week or so I am cut up through here. I'm going to go, I'm planning on a first look around Vermont. There's a couple of other spots like I've mentioned previously I want to get to as well. One in a different part of Connecticut. I kick up one more fucking stick, I'm getting really annoyed. And two in New Hampshire. After doing a little bit more research. I'm actually wondering if it's been more windy in here. It just seems like there's more shit on the ground in my way. But let's make an effort to not whine about that. There's a tree break for stick structure people. Which I assigned nothing Bigfoot related to. This is a big weird looking semi-woodpecker looking assaulted tree that is typical of this stretch of woods. I was hoping to deploy the cameras in an area that kind of spreads out over an area, and I originally was going to try to put out 3, but stupid me, I had 2 batteries too few, and I half-assedly after work to the point I was just trying to whine about too short. So 2 are out, 1 is not, and we'll see how that goes. What I found in my battery collection though is I have enough AAA batteries for the apocalypse. Of course every camera has take AA's, so as luck would have it, didn't work out. I have 2, so we'll see what we can accomplish with that. Regarding other Bigfoot news, granted I don't have my finger on the pulse every day, but and I'll double check my social feed once I get up the hill here and have a second to stop. There's some kind of mystery shit. Not your normal moose or deer pellets. That looks more like either Bambi ate something a little beefier, or else they or it's a bear, which even though I haven't seen any in here, if they hear me yapping, they probably move the other way. I have seen in here for the first time, having absolutely nothing to do with Bigfoot. If you know what fiddleheads are, I had always kind of thought they were like a Vermont thing, but apparently we have them growing here. So if you fry those up, and it's one more edible plant in the neighborhood, should you be of a mind. What's kind of an ironic shame in my own neighborhood, as an aside, is the amount of wild onions along our neighborhood walking trail that go completely unnoticed. You could make one hell of a huge bowl of French onion soup, if you like that, with what's just growing in the neighborhood, because there are clumps of them. Imagine an area that big, like easily 200 clumps of wild onion grains right in that area, just growing up like a patch for people to have. The other chronic wasteful thing people do because they're stupid, and it is a stupid thing, is when you just cut down dandelions. Dandelions are not only edible, they make a good addition to salad. If I remember right, The flowers actually have a decent amount of vitamin C in them too, so they're actually good for you. And yet we basically cut them down and ignore them. There was actually a friend of mine was at a resort where they had wild blackberries growing. My favorite bat, and they basically, when he let them know and gathered up a bunch, they cut down the bushes for reasons only they know. The other interesting fact about dandelions, while I'm just throwing out random bits of freaking wild edible trivia, there are recipes for dandelion wine, dandelion coffee, and dandelion beer. I made an effort to make dandelion wine and ended up with a very mild but very pleasant sangria, so kind of a partial credit win for that, but very mild. Might even be like a virgin sangria, like a mocktail kind of level, because it really was not strong at all, despite going through all the efforts of fermentation that you would with home brewing. Something I haven't done in a while. But it was, doing it for the first time, it really wasn't bad at all. It was actually very pleasant. It was a refreshing thing around the pool, just as an aside as well. So we are at this point along what I'm going to call the ridge line, because the third bog is right there, and if I remember and the battery life is there, I might try to put the drone up before we hit Vermont and get a full mapping of that son of a bitch, because it's kind of in two sections. The section you see down there is all undergrowth and patchy. You're going to sink up to your knees in mud crap, and then if you're way over to the far end, probably the length of like 4 football fields to the north, it's more like a sandy meadow. Not a sandy, like a grassy meadow, and you can actually get in there. So part of that is actually be interesting to get trail cams out there if I was more ambitious. I have them deployed. I'm not going to redeploy them now, but that's something to do in the future. Get them way the fuck out on the far end of the meadow where they will be anything that goes through there passing through in the night. Big open area, night vision. Hell of a good area for a night op too. Should anyone local want to partake of such an activity, I'm throwing that out there if you want to leave that in the comments. So the one, I guess this is political, but it's such a freaking mind-bogglingly spoiled brat kind of thing to do. It warrants mention. There is, if you haven't heard about this, as of right now, and this is confirmed on multiple news sources, because when I first heard this, I thought this was nonsensical BS too, but I was kind of dismayed to realize that it was actually happening. You have 76, count them, 76 American citizens, U.S. citizens, right now languishing in Dutch refugee camps. First world people with first world problems who have fled the U.S. trying to seek asylum in the Netherlands and basically live on their welfare system, on their dole. And there's more to it, but the point that just I find amusing and damned annoying and sad is, yes, I'm not a Trumper either. I don't like the guy, but I'm not so obsessed with it that I'm going to fucking give up my entire life and seek asylum in another country under the auspice that I am under threat of dire persecution or worse here, because that's just not the case. And I have said some things online that some people of that persuasion might find a bit inflammatory. There's been no knock on my door, and if they don't have a warrant, they'd be leaving anyway. But that not being said, they thought they were going to go in and live on the public dole of the Netherlands, not unlike a lot of people come from troubled parts of the world to the UK and the UK under Keir Starmer, a person who I consider to be a person guilty of destroying their society from within, and he honestly should be deposed by force. Yes, I just called for the armed overthrow of the British government by people with more sense than Keir Starmer, and I have no plans to go over there and launch some kind of an effort to do so, but you're letting people from dangerous parts of the world with radically different freaking viewpoints think like Islamic countries coming in and trying to reshape British society to their liking. And this liberal shithead is letting them do that. Well, they come in and the first thing they do is they hop on welfare benefits, and not only are they trying to subvert your society, your tax dollars over there, Brit folks, the pound is paying for that at the same time. Your tax money is literally financing their bullshit. And no, that is not okay. It should not be okay with you. But you have these 76 idiots over in the Netherlands trying to act like third world migrants and act out their victim complex. Again, these are first world people with first world problems. Now, granted, many of them are LGBTQ, and their premise is that the Trump administration is making them under threat here in the U.S., and I'm not going to go down that particular rabbit hole given the hot button issue it would turn into. That is not the purpose of this channel, and I'm not going to go down that road. But the weird thing about this is, and you can look this up on Google or the search engine of your choice yourself, it's a weird choice because the Netherlands actually has more strict transitioning laws than the U.S. does, which makes their thought process in this one a curious one. Like, what was the premise you were operating on going in this as your master plan? Because unfortunately, these 76 dullards are currently sitting in refugee camps because the Dutch government basically said, no, you come from a safe country that's just as good as ours, and you can go the fuck back home and handle your problems there. And in my estimation, rightly so. And again, because the Dutch have stricter laws pertaining to their particular sense of persecution. And again, I'm going to dance around this because I'm not going to get pulled into that debate. I'm just not going to. It just seems an odd choice considering that they have stricter laws. Why not France? Why not Italy? Why not Spain or any other EU country for that matter? Why not Canada? And actually, Canada is one of the countries, they'll probably be one of the first countries to send you back home because they're touchy enough about people from the U.S. going up there to work and take away Canadian jobs. And apparently the housing crisis in Canada is much worse than it is here. So, but they are very touchy about us going up there to take their jobs, let alone like go up there and jump on freaking Canadian welfare. And as much as somebody might want to argue that I'm being insensitive towards these people and their plight, understand that they are probably side by side with people coming from Middle Eastern countries or other countries that are a lot poorer than the Netherlands or the U.S. and probably probably fleeing like real actual persecution. Like if they stay there, their government will kill them given the chance. Because I'm sorry, in the region of the country that I live in, I have not seen any evidence of any such persecution on any level that would warrant this kind of a misadventure. And again, this may sound insensitive, but by comparison with the people they're probably sharing space with in these refugee camps, these are people from third world countries that are probably a lot more dirt poor than you are. And the only reason that they're languishing in these refugee camps that they're now crying about the pitiful conditions of is because they're fighting their own deportations, when honestly, if they really wanted to, being a typical American, they probably have the wealth level to just turn around and grab a ticket and fly back home, take the L and resume their life in the U.S. But it's not like the Dutch government is forcing them in there and keeping them as prisoners. They are in there because they are fighting their deportation. So as much as these crybabies are crying about the horrible conditions of these refugee camps, and I'm sure it's not a luxury resort, but the fact is you're there on a basis of your choice to be there because you're fighting your extradition. Not extradition, I'm sorry, your deportation. Extradition would be if you're a criminal. Maybe some of you got arrested, I don't know. But I doubt all 76 have. But you're there under the pretense of operating on their welfare system, and they told you no, and it's time to come home. And handle the reality that for another 2 years you're living under the Trump junta, and that's what it is. Which is why I am an independent that dislikes both sides of the argument, because as much as I'm not really a big Trumper, when you have people that are this deluded going and doing dumb shit like this and putting themselves in these stupid situations, and then, let's be blunt, choosing to stay in these miserable conditions when they could just, again, take the L, buy a fucking plane ticket and come home, they're doing this to themselves, and yet they're whining about their perennial victimhood, which is, at this point, honestly self-inflicted. And again, I'm not going to touch on the rest of that, the whole LGBTQ thing, which is not, obviously it's relevant to them. However, it's the principle for me that they are going into a foreign EU country and saying, oh, poor us, pay for everything, and then pay for our transition too. Because I think that's what they were also expecting. And again, your transition laws there are stricter, and you'd be doing it on their welfare system, which they're not going to pay for. They've told you that. It's time to just suck it up and come home. And again, I'm sure you're not like in the Ritz. You are basically like, it's a Prethen Light. Well, it's a fucking refugee camp. What do you expect? But again, I'm willing to bet if you gave up your fight to stay there and you just wanted to come home, you could take the L and just hop on a plane and fly home. Ironically, the one avenue you do have, and I could be partially wrong on this, and if I am, please correct me, but the one avenue they could take to actually maybe get into the Netherlands would be to actually serve in the Dutch military. Why you'd want to do this, I don't know, and being that you're probably a hard leftist, you probably aren't going to go for army service anyway, but the ironic thing is, if you are a naturally born U.S. citizen, the one of a few ways where you can actually lose your citizenship is A, flat out treason, or B, serving in a foreign military. I could be wrong. I think it's limited to hostile militaries, and I don't believe that an EU country such as the Netherlands would fall into that category, potentially. But again, I could be wrong either way. So if you actually did do that, and then at the end of that period you found out that they were not going to make you a citizen of the Netherlands, and you were to then consequently lose your U.S. citizenship, congratulations, genius. You're a first world person who, through their own stupidity, is now stateless. And maybe you want to Google what it's like to be stateless, because it is no picnic. You have no right to work. You have no right to marry. You have no right to vote in any fucking country that you're in. You are basically a second-rate non-person as a stateless individual. And if they didn't know where to send you or send you home, you're going to be stuck in those refugee camps a lot fucking longer. And again, you began this misadventure as a first world person with first world problems. That's enough of a rant. If you don't think this is happening, you can feel free to Google it yourself. And I may not have gotten everything exactly right, but I did go to a news site, allsides.com, where you get the left view, the right view, and the view up the middle. And multiple news sources did indicate that you have 76 dullards with a persecution complex and perennial victimhood who fled the U.S. to go and live like third world migrants in a freaking refugee camp, when they could probably just buy a plane ticket and fly home after they went on their little misadventure to go and try to become Dutch citizens and live on their public dole, and the Dutch told them no. probably very politely. I've known some Dutch people, and they tend to be very polite, very formal, but polite. And probably just said, no, we're not doing that. Because you don't have any real problems. Apparently, like you have Syrian refugees and people that are basically fleeing war zones and the like, and you are not fleeing a war zone. As much as the political discourse in this country is effective, I guess I'm going full political for a bit. As much as the political discourse in this country is effectively a shit show of two tribes of basically butthurt 5-year-olds name calling across a schoolyard at this point, and yes it is. And before anyone goes into the comments and says, well, the other side, fuck you both suck, I'm not going to fucking hear that. For every Trumper who believes that he's the second coming of something that's probably very likely the Antichrist, if not, he's a Cheeto-headed simpleton who's basically increasingly senile. He is 80 years old, folks. You have a leftist who, aside from obsessing on the Epstein files and ignoring the fact that people from both parties were guilty of being there. Yes, in all likelihood, Cheeto Head was there. But so were the Clintons. So was Bill Gates. When Ricky Gervais at the I think it was the Golden Globes, basically was talking in the direction of Tom Hanks, he got very nervous. And so it wasn't just the righties that were there. It wasn't just the right tards that were there. The left tards were there too. So plenty of guilt to go around. And you know who was behind all that? Probably not somebody you thought. Epstein was in the pocket of the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence service, because they like to have a lot of dirt on Americans to make sure that we do their bidding in the Middle East, and that's been the way it is forever. And if you're Israeli and you deny this, fuck you, you know I'm right. But they can't go and get dirt by themselves on people like Bill Gates and Elon Musk and all these other gazillionaires, so they basically had somebody come out with a little sexual candy store and have them go and diddle youngsters, and in that course, then they had them hit dead to rights, and that's how that worked. They used him as a proxy. In the same weird way that Iran uses Hamas and Hezbollah as proxies against Israel, Israel has their own little weird proxy in the U.S. Go wrap your mind around that for a minute. That's the fucked up world we live in. Anyway. We have covered enough in the way of politics, but that one story stood out so weirdly, it warranted mention. You got, like I said, these are first world people on what could really just arguably be called a third world victimhood vacation, because probably 99% of them can afford to just fly home and accept the fact that the Netherlands told them no, but instead they are choosing to stay there and fight deportation. Even as I hear the annoying sound of dirt bikes on in an area where they are illegally at, and I'll report them if I find them, but you got to see them first. But yeah, they could probably just afford to fly home. Because I'd be willing to bet if you were to pull your typical Dutch government official and say, so if these people just decided, hey, I want to go home now, they probably, oh, great, get the fuck out. Well, there's your plane ticket, there's your plane, get the fuck out of here, bye. Go bother some other country. Maybe France will hook you up. Maybe the Brits will put you on the public dole. They'll take about anyone these days. Go talk to Keir Starmer. Maybe he'll pay for your transitioning, I don't know. And again, I'm not mocking the fact that they're trans. That's not the point. The point is, you are languishing in a refugee camp because you chose to. Unless I thoroughly misread something, and if I did, I'll eat crow on that, but I don't think I did. Anyway, moving on. In fact, just to get that out of my mind completely, let's take a segment break, because I'm going to go down into this stuff over here. And I have seen moose plop. I've also seen deer plop, so I'm kind of hoping that the camera spread I put out into the woods will maybe get bullwinkle or something more exotic than that coming through here, because even though in the daytime, because I'm yapping obviously, you don't run into a lot in here, there's signs of wildlife all through this place. This, when you factor in that half of this area is on the other side of the state line, it is not a tiny area. It's actually a confluence of how many, 4 if not 5 state forests in 2 states. It's a big honking area. You can't cover it all, and I'm like the one guy doing this. There was another guy local, by local I mean Connecticut resident, in here and other places as well, but good guy. I'm talking about Chris Reinhardt. He's a good guy. I haven't run into him lately. And that being said, I'm going to take a segment break and get the 76 idiots out of my head. And again, let's not go down that road. I'm going to take a segment break and make myself shut up now. We're back, and what's going on? Kind of just a petty observation that it's interesting that this hillside, I was here 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, where the heck is that big open thing? It's right there, actually. The problem is, with the undergrowthy stuff filling in, a lot of what looks a lot more wide open in the course of March into early April, as April becomes May and this stuff fills in, it starts getting a lot thicker. And I think I've mentioned in the past, it's amazing season to season how much this particular stretch of woods can change in its appearance. And you'll walk through and you think you know exactly where you're going, but it looks completely different. You have to take a second to remind yourself where you are. You have those 2 big rocks down there on the hill that are overlooking the beginnings of the briar patch down there. I lied. I didn't fully get this news story out of my head because I just find it that incredibly stupid. It literally is like a first world victimhood vacation. I'm going to try not to beat it to death in my head, but things like that just kind of, they challenge my tolerance of some things. That was a lot thicker and harder than I thought that was going to be. Ow. Anyway, I'm actually a lot further down the hill than I thought. Is right there. So if I do find the time and energy and confluence of mind and intent to, I'm going to put the trail cams another week down in this area, because what's interesting is the abundance of ungulate leavings, like food animals, which would mean possibly predators. But on top of that, just how bleeping quiet it is. Not so much the dirt bike idiots over 2 or 3 hills, but back here on this side of the hill, you're basically down and away from anything really, and you don't really see a lot of human sign in here. So none really. The odd bow hunter comes through here, but your typical like deer hunter in the fall maybe, but in this time of year, not really much of anyone comes through here. Because something was digging around in here for some, that could be any one of a number of critters. But we're going to start working our way gradually back in a big loop through here, do another pattern sweep kind of thing. See, I mean, there's like, this is all over the place. There's deer coming through here and all that. You don't see them now, but they don't always tend to be the most noisy animal walking through an area like this. Although they're close enough, you could probably hear them crunching in the leaves, but further out, not so much. Wondering if I want to gather some of those freaking fiddleheads on the way out. Fry those up. Anyway, yeah, we're on the ridge line. Probably further to the left on the ridge line than I think I am. I usually equate this section over here with the other side of that big broken tree over there. But anyway, thinking out loud. Hopefully the camera's not moving too much. I try not to move it that much. The other one was more distorted when I was still using the fisheye lens. I had just fallen into the habit of using that one. Not why I'm talking about that right now, I have no idea, but I'm going to probably take another segment break and see what else is on my mind. But again, don't be one of these like self-victimizing idiots that decries their victimhood in a situation that they honestly did create for themselves, because no one's holding the prisoner there. I guarantee you. Yes, I'm beating on this again. I guarantee you that if they went to any Dutch official running that camp and said, I want to go home and give up my fight to be deported, they're going to basically, they'll get you to the airport and you get yourself a plane ticket and off you go, and they're like, bye, don't come again, see ya. But that's just the emphasis. They are there because they chose to be there, because they're fighting their deportation, because they want to have their surgery and their living be paid for by the Dutch welfare system, which the Dutch people should not have to pay for. The horse is on its last whimper, yes, but just to beat it into the ground and kill the horse off altogether, so we don't have zombie clop. First world people with first world problems, trying to abuse another first world country's freaking resources for their own selfish victimhood, which is not as bad as they would have you believe, in my humble opinion. But here we are. Moving to segment break. We'll be back in a bit. On the other side of the creek, back over by the beaver pond over there. So when I go fishing next week, maybe I may come here and try that again, but over on the other side by the beaver dam over there. In the meantime, quiet day in here. We have some detection devices out. As I said, there's plentiful bits of this, so there's at least deer in the neighborhood in relative abundance. I know for a fact over there's a moose that comes through every now and then. So we have some potential participants for a forest survey, and we'll hopefully get something when I retrieve cameras later in the week, only because I have work obligations the week after to keep them out there. Maybe actually I can't come out until I'll have to plan out the timing. But anyway, we're at that part where we do the like, subscribe, hit the notification bell button, all that, and leave comments as you see fit. And until next time, that's about all I got for you today. So until then, bye.